did the entire photo shoot in about 5 days. We walked an average of about 9 miles a day. Our longest day was 13 miles, which is like a half marathon. Like we walked a half marathon in one day, wandering all over the city looking for like the perfect angles and getting the right guy to open the gate so we can get over there or climb that wall or talk to somebody. And a lot of it was that challenge.
Welcome to Along the Way. I'm John Matarazzi, your host and fellow traveler. Thank you for joining me along my way as I try to become more like Jesus every day. Doug Hershey is an adventure guide who leads tours through Israel, but God has led him on an unexpected journey that has become a big part of his life's calling. Doug's previous book, Israel Rising: Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens, beautifully portrayed how those ancient biblical prophecies are really coming true, and even the desert is coming back to life. In this episode, Doug tells the story behind his latest book, Jerusalem Rising, and how the city of peace is reawakening. I'll get to our conversation in just a moment, but as always, I want to thank you for listening to Along the Way. I hope that you like what you hear and you subscribe. Please rate and review Along the Way on Apple Podcast or wherever you're listening. All of my socials and contact links are in the show notes, and you can check out all of my episodes and join my email list through my website, alongtheway.media. I would love to hear from you. I also have a Patreon page if you want to help me to continue to put out these Along the Way episodes. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter, simply go to patreon.com/alongtheway and select a level. The link to become a supporter is in my show notes. And now, here is my second Along the Way conversation with Doug Hershey. Well, Doug Hershey, it's great to have you back on Along the Way. Thanks so much for being here and creating another book. I mean, the last time that you were on this podcast, you had Israel Rising, which is one of my favorite books to look through and just kind of be amazed to see what God has done in the land of Israel over the last 150 years, maybe. And it's great to have you back to talk about your book, Jerusalem Rising. And so thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We were just talking a little bit beforehand. We've known each other for quite a while, so it's always good to jump back on with you. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I mean, we've broke bread together, or Permanis, or things like that. Whenever you
Indeed, we have
at the TV station with me up in Pittsburgh at Cornerstone Network, and now I'm down in Florida, and you're all over the place right now talking about this new book. But unfortunately, you haven't been able to get to Israel because of this darn pandemic that we're still dealing with. But at least you're taking part of Israel with you wherever you go, especially through these books.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some of what people are asking me is, when can we get back to Israel? When can we get back to Israel? And thankfully, I had shot a lot of, all of this was done before the pandemic with both Jerusalem Rising. Actually, content for a third book as well is already finished. And so I've been using that exact line, was like, well, until you can't get to Israel, or until you can get back to Israel, I can bring Israel to you through a bunch of photo books.
Mm-hmm. And so these are more than just then and now photo books. At first glance, that's kind of what they look like, but there's so much more to this whole Rising series, I guess. Now, I'm guessing the third book is going to continue with that Rising theme as well. But so we had indeed. Israel Rising, and then now Jerusalem Rising. Could you just explain this whole concept and how God brought that to you?
Yeah, the series is called Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens. And so there's no other people group on the planet and in history that has had its history foretold, from its destruction and sort of desolation and the scattering of the people, to return to the exact same piece of real estate as an identifiable, recognizable people speaking the same language, but to have that whole process foretold ahead of time, 2,600 years, not the Romans or the Greeks or the Chinese, the Persians, there's no ancient people group that have any type of writing like that, except the Jewish people. And all of those prophecies are in the prophets, in the scriptures. And so part of that aspect is with the Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens series, it's providing and documenting visual evidence or visual documentation of ancient prophecies by using a modern lens. And so it's not just, as you said, not just a then and now photography, but it's then and now photography that points back to the things that were spoken 2,600 years ago.
Yeah.
And so these books really weren't intended to be even a religious book or a spiritual book, I suppose. It was intended to be more of like here's the ancient prophecy, here's a bunch of history, and here's what's happening now. You can decide whether what's happening
Hmm.
now is what was talked about then, and just kind of
Yeah.
let the Spirit of God kind of take over from there.
And you run a tour company, Ezra Adventures, that you go to Israel, you take teams or people, individuals, and you do things that are a little bit different. And I've actually had a friend that I didn't realize that he was going on a trip with you until I saw him posting pictures with you from Israel, and I thought that was really, really cool. But you kind of do things that are off the beaten path. And I think at one point you told me that you kind of wanted to use this book to help promote the tourism thing, but it's kind of worked, and that's become its own. God's breathed life into it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, more than I expected. I mean, really, it, you're really right on the money. I mean, Israel Rising, the first one was intended to be sort of an advertisement for the travel company, which has been actually going on for 5 or 6 years now. We're doing small group travel. A lot of it is very customized, very personalized for groups up to 10, maybe 12 people at the most. So, it's small group travel. Not only with Israel and Jordan, really, since Israel and Jordan have been closed, we've actually been expanding into Turkey and going to a lot of the New Testament sites in the Book of Acts and Galatians and and Ephesians and the 7 churches of Revelation. We've been starting to do groups there, which has been phenomenal. But yeah, it was all small group related and still is. But Israel Rising was intended to be an advertisement for that. To be completely honest, I mean, I just wondered, like, I wonder if anybody would be interested in this picture book. Maybe in a couple of years, I might break even on it or something. I just, it's all a business expense. And
Yeah, sure, sure.
by God's mercy, with Israel Rising, we sold through the first print run of 10,000 books before the release date, and then it really took off from there. And so after,
And then it took off. Wow.
well, it really did. I mean, I don't say that jokingly. Like, it really
Yeah.
kind of took off from there. And so after really about 3 years after Israel Rising, now with Jerusalem Rising, about a year ago or a year and a half ago, I realized that there's still not another book like it. And
Mhm.
I really had this moment, really kind of with the Lord, just to realize, like, this is something I need to double down on. This isn't just
Yeah.
something I'm going to throw one together and maybe hope it goes well. Like, I feel like that this is something God has given me to do. I have a whole series
Mhm.
in mind, and the books are literally going around the world, and I'm hearing just incredible, really humbling stories
Yeah.
of the impact that it's had for families, for people in their Bible studies, for just what God has done. So
Mhm.
it's been having an impact that I never really anticipated.
Yeah, that's great. I know a couple years ago, I actually bought Israel Rising and gave it to my family for a Christmas gift because we love those types of, coffee table books with the beautiful pictures and things like that. And I remember you telling me that the ancient pictures are basically 150 years old. Those pictures are, you kind of came across this library or this cache of pictures. How did this come around for Jerusalem? Was it in the same place and you just pulled out the Jerusalem ones for this? Like, tell me about these pictures that you're using from the ancient side?
Yeah, for Jerusalem Rising, I'd found some of the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken from 1844, and even some from the 1850s and 60s. But really, these old photos from 1844, I had actually used a couple of them in Israel Rising at the very beginning, just
Mm.
as an example of, like, a couple old photos just to show them. But then ended up going back and again wanting to recreate all of these. And a lot of these old shots from 1844 were really forgotten in history up until really maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, not even 20
Mm.
years ago. And the Smithsonian then published them for the first time ever in 2014. And so, really, in terms of photos in Jerusalem, is really brand new on the world stage. And so,
Mm.
but there's a whole really sort of fascinating story behind this whole journey that kind of led into Jerusalem Rising, and it was really something that, as God would have it, it was like we did a lot of these photo recreations, and then I started studying in a little bit more to get the manuscript together, and then I didn't. It's like I realized how significant the story was done, or how significant the story was after after all of the photography was done, and I realized just how well they just I mean, it was just amazing. I was really kind of blessed by the whole thing.
So what is this story that you're talking about? Because you can't just leave us hanging there, man.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's a lot more to it, and you were just kind of teasing me a little bit before we got started here about the there's you're talking about ancient prophecy in a modern lens, but this is a little bit more than just that, because you kind of really flip things on their head.
Yeah. So in 1844, actually, the story begins back really in 1839. In France, there is a guy named Louis Daguerre who invents this new style of photography that is these little copper plates that are covered in silver, and to develop this photography. I mean, this is like the very, very beginning of photography that, you put, I can't remember, I think it's like mercury and iodine and a few other chemicals on it, and you put it in this little box, and you open the shutter or open the light entry, and the light will come in. And sometimes you let the light in for 2, 3, 4 minutes. Sometimes you close the shutter, and then you have this, this little plate that has an image burnt on it. And it was remarkably clear in comparison to anything else that was done. And so there's this French painter in Paris who isn't a photographer, he's a painter, and he learns this from Louis Daguerre himself. And as this was announced, I think it was in 1839, 1840, it was this whole new state-of-the-art photography. This is going to change the world. And again, we say state-of-the-art, looking back now, they're like these huge trunks and boxes, and just like, I mean, it was just, it was not like something easy to transport. And,
right.
And so he and several other of these photographers go on these adventures through what was considered the known world, and a lot went straight to the Middle East. And this French painter, who again he loved painting, he loved landscapes and architecture, but his intention wasn't thinking about the future of photography. His intention was thinking about taking a bunch of pictures and then bringing them home and then painting them for pen drawings or so
sure.
So from 1841 to 1844, he spends 3 years going through what's now Egypt, Syria, and Israel, and into Greece and Italy, and spends 3 years doing all these photography. He comes back to France with over 900 of these plates. And again, he's not thinking like a photographer, he's thinking like a painter. So he paints some stuff and he publishes some things, but no one knows that he has these things. And he builds these boxes for these photo plates, and basically sticks them in a closet or sticks them in his garage, or puts them somewhere in his house. And it's reported they were never on any type of exhibition. They were never shown to anybody except maybe like on dinner parties.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that he has them. This is 1844. He was in Jerusalem. Nobody knows that he has them until in the 1920s. This is like 30 years after his death. One of his neighbors buys his dilapidated estate, starts fixing it up, going through the stuff, and finds these boxes and opens them up and goes, what are these? And this whole Daguerre type style photography lasted maybe about 10 years. By the 1950s, they had already advanced into some different film, and things had changed. So it was it was state of the art for such a short time, and then it was completely outdated and obsolete. Nobody was using it.
Right.
And so they're found in 1920, but they don't come onto any type of the world stage until 2003. One of them comes up for auction at one of these high-end auctions, and one of the plates sell for almost $900,000 to some Saudi prince. And the photography world is like, who is this French photographer? Why don't we know about this guy? Nobody knew anything about him. And so, they start doing some research or whatever, and the Smithsonian gets a hold of some of these images and digitizes his work and publishes them in 2014. So that's literally 160 years from the time that were taken to the time that the world is finding out about this guy. And what's amazing about it is, because I keep saying, because he was a photographer, or because he was a painter and not a photographer, that was very well probably the reason that these plates have survived. There was lots of other people that were doing it, but none of their work has survived. And so it's almost like God uses this guy to take these photos, specifically of Jerusalem, puts them in a time capsule, basically, like in the dark, in the time capsule for
Wow.
like 160 years. The Smithsonian then digitizes them and starts showing them. But what's amazing, and I'm getting to this in terms of Jerusalem Rising, is when when the Smithsonian digitized them, they digitized the actual daguerreotype photo plates, which is actually a reverse image. You know, in our modern cameras, there's something that will flip the image, that will reverse the image, so that
Right.
when we're looking through the eye lens, or looking through the lens, that it makes the adjustment. So with this daguerre type photography, if you're taking somebody waving their left hand, you'll pull out the plate and you'll flip it around to look at it, and it looks like they're waving their right hand. So
Uh-huh.
so no one in Jerusalem, there's a few people in Jerusalem that understand the mistake just simply because they live there, but most of the world doesn't recognize it. So for me, prior to COVID, I spent maybe 6 months of the year in Israel for several years prior. And so, I know Israel, I know Jerusalem, and I would look at some of these old photos of Jerusalem going like, I know the Temple Mount, I know the Jaffa Gate. I have no idea where these angles are from until a friend said, if you turn them around, if they're digitized, flip the image. So we flipped the image, and I went, oh my God, like I know exactly where that's at. Like, this is amazing. I started reading and doing some research and realizing that no one had ever flipped the images and published them to show the world what Jerusalem
What it actually looked like.
Exactly, what it actually looked like in 1844. So in Jerusalem Rising, we were able to do that with a lot of the more popular ones of Jerusalem, is to show
That's cool.
show the daguerreotype style photography of the plates that were reversed, and then show the actual view of the images that were flipped.
Gotcha. And you kind of have like a whole section of that, and that's pretty cool. So you then teamed up with somebody to go and find those angles again, those viewpoints, and now take the modern pictures. Tell me about some of these stories of some of the things that happened, and you said there's a cool thing that happened with your photographer as well.
Yeah, so my photographer on this book, his name is Eden Ram. He's a young, hungry Israeli adventure photographer and filmmaker. He's doing stuff in Dubai and in ski slopes and in the Swiss Alps, and I mean he's doing stuff for Lufthansa, like all over. I mean he's living in Tel Aviv. He's very talented, and I looked through his portfolio. Really, I just started looking at photographers on Facebook and looking at portfolios and their websites. His stuff just like really grabbed me, and so I messaged him, explained what I was doing. We met at a pub in Tel Aviv late at night. It was raining. It was thunderstorms. It was in the wintertime in Israel, and we get together, and I'm just meeting him, just kind of getting to know him, trying to think, is this guy, is this guy going to work out? And
yeah,
and so I asked him. I said, so like you do a bunch of adventure stuff for ski lodges or resorts or fashion or whatever. Like, why are you interested in this type of book? And he kind of shifted a little bit in his seat, and he kind of looks both ways and leans in a little bit. And he says, well, I guess I could tell you this. But he said, I've been traveling around the world. I've been doing all this stuff. And I just realized I haven't done anything for Israel. Like, I want to do something for Israel. And I went, done. Like, if it was that much of a heart motivation that he can't quite understand it. He's feeling his heart pull to Jerusalem, and he just wants to do something for Israel in Jerusalem, then that was good enough for me. Like I didn't want just a talented guy. I wanted somebody whose heart was engaged, and his definitely was.
Very cool.
And it turned out that he's from California originally, was born in California, but his family made Aliyah, and they moved back and became Israeli citizens in his early teen years. So he went through the army. He's fluent in Hebrew and is really more Israeli than anything now. So, which means that he's assertive, he's aggressive. He doesn't mind standing around arguing with people to get to where we need to be and push our way into stuff. So, I mean, he was phenomenal. He was awesome to work with.
Was there a story about the tattoo?
Yes,
on his arm. There's a picture that you kind of include. I think it's like a behind the scenes type of thing, because if he's the photographer, he's got the camera. I think you put out your cell phone and took this picture. Is that what happened?
Actually, I had my daughter with me as well on the photo shoot, who was 16 at the time. She wanted to come along on this photo shoot. And, but yeah, he has a tattoo of 1111 on his back arm, on the back of his right arm. And I put it in the book because in the book there are these little sections called personal encounters. I did the same thing with Israel Rising, which is just
Hmm.
people I met along the way during the photo shoots. And so in Jerusalem Rising, there are personal encounters of people who we met in Jerusalem. And of course, Eden
Yeah.
was one in particular. So I write this little story and it's like a little blog story in there. And with Eden's permission, I included it in the book. But I asked him about it one day. We were sitting down for coffee on a little break while we were hunting some stuff down, and and asked like, "Hey man, tell me about the tattoo on the back of your arm. 1111. What does that mean?" And he's sort of a thoughtful guy, and and said, "Well, it's he and Eden's not a believer. I mean, he's just sort of a young secular Jewish guy."
Hmm.
He said, "It's just been sort of like a spiritual compass for me. Like anytime I see 1111, it's like something like I'm doing. It's like the right thing at the right time, and
Okay.
it just kind of helps kind of center me a little bit." And that's just sort of how he described it. And I said, "So Eden, did you just out of curiosity were you starting to see 1111 before or after you moved to Israel?" And he started thinking about it. And he said, "Well, that started happening before, like when I was a kid in California." And I said, "So then afterwards, after you moved, like it continued just to kind of you just kept seeing it everywhere?" He's like, "Yeah, it's sort of my thing, which is why I got the tattoo." And I said,
Hmm.
"Well, and he knows that I teach about Bible prophecy, and I said, it's significant to me
Yeah.
that in the Bible, Isaiah 11:11 says that in that day God will return His people to the land a second time, and the first time that God returned His people to the land is under Ezra and Nehemiah. They're exiled to the Babylonian Empire. They come back.
Hmm.
They're returning the first time. Under Ezra and Nehemiah, the people are there for a couple hundred years until the Romans. The Romans destroy the temple, throw everybody out. The time when God is returning His people to the land a second time, according to Isaiah 11:11, is right now. And I said, I'm explaining this to him, and I said, it's just curious to me that you were seeing that before you made your family made Aliyah, that you came to Israel, is because Isaiah 11:11 is about the Jewish people returning a second time to the land. And
Hmm.
and I said, isn't it wild that here you and I are working on a project called Jerusalem Rising about the restoration of Jerusalem through then and now photography according to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And you're telling me that, here you are as a young, Jewish guy, and you're feeling a pull back to the land of Israel just exactly the way Isaiah 11:11 said. And he just kind of sat back, and we just kind of had this moment where it's just like, I mean, because we were literally having this conversation in a coffee shop, like sitting outside a coffee shop in the old city of
Yeah.
Jerusalem. And I'm going like you and I both know, like I'm showing him the old pictures that we're recreating. Like this place was a dump, like less than 100 years
Hmm.
ago, for hundreds of years prior to that. And here we are sitting in the
Hmm.
Jewish quarter, thriving Jewish life. Prophecy is being fulfilled. I'm having this conversation with him. Like prophecy is literally being fulfilled all around us. And here you and I are in the Jewish quarter documenting the restoration of the city according to exactly what God said. And so his heart was really stirred, and he was just like, "Whoa, like this is amazing." And
Yeah.
so we had some of these really special encounters where God just sort of reached into our day and just sort of dropped some truth bombs on us of just saying like, "I am fulfilling my word. I'm doing exactly what I said I
Hmm.
would do." And really kind of, it was exciting for me because it's again kind of like what he was saying. I kind of felt like that, for me, that doing these photo shoots has been like treasure hunts. It's like right place at the right time, doing exactly what I felt like God put on my heart, following the Lord, with how He's been leading, and it's been really special.
That's really cool, Doug. That is really cool. I love those personal encounter stories that you put in there in your books because you, as the author, are taking people on this journey to see this ancient prophecy from the modern perspective, through the modern lens. But I know you had a verse that you themed your Israel Rising about. I believe that was from Ezekiel, but you have a different verse for this book. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's the entire chapter of Zechariah 8, and it's this really special chapter that begins by God saying, "I am jealous for Zion, and I'm returning to Jerusalem to dwell with my people." And He said, "I'm going to bring them back from the north, the south, the east, and the west, bring them back to the city to dwell in safety. Old men and old women will be sitting in the square and talking, and the children will be playing in the streets. And it goes on later to say about how that the nations will flood back to Jerusalem. And there's Jerusalem has been, aside from being a bit of a dump for the last 17, 1800 years. I mean, it's been conquered and reconquered multiple times. It's changed hands like 40 times. It's been completely razed to the ground, or leveled to the ground, at least twice. And ironically, the city of peace has not been known for peace. And so here we are in a season of time that Jerusalem has not enjoyed peace and security the way that it has in the last 50 years, really since biblical times. And, of course, there's been pockets of it here and there, but one thing is for sure, aside from the security, never before have the nations flooded to Israel the way they were, at least starting pre-COVID. 2018 and 2019 were the largest tourism numbers in Israel ever. So 2018, while there's almost 9 million people living in Israel, there was 4 million that came in tourism from the nations. And in 2019, there was 4.5 million that came from the nations. Now, Zechariah 8, in the context, people are coming to seek the Lord. And, clearly people aren't coming to seek the Lord now, but just making the point that, this isn't, I'm not claiming like this is the fulfillment, but it is undeniable that for the first time, really since the time Zechariah spoke this stuff, that literally the nations are starting to come to Jerusalem and make it a center and focal point. And so this whole aspect of Zechariah 8 has some very practical aspects, much like we covered in Israel Rising with Ezekiel 36. There are some very practical, tangible things that are happening exactly the way that God said. And so the whole book series is, looking at these ancient prophecies and what has God done since 1948, or in Jerusalem's case, since 1967, when Jerusalem again becomes completely under Jewish hands, versus what did the land look like before the Jewish people were really settled back into the land. And that's been one of the really special things, is to be able to say, here's something that was spoken in the scriptures 2,600 years ago that have never come to pass. At least in the way that it is right now, and with photography or with a video camera, like we're able to begin documenting those early stages, not so much as a then and now project, but to point back and to give people visual aids that God is doing exactly what He said He would do.
And God is continuing to do that. And I know you and I have talked about just some of the amazing things of prophecy that are coming to life. I mean, the Dead Sea, you showed me videos where there is literally fresh water that's bubbling up in the Dead Sea. And there's streams in the desert that weren't there before. And it's a whole different conversation. I think we touched on that a good bit last time. But, we're really seeing these things. We're seeing the promises of God as the land is coming back to life. And I was in Israel in 2003, December and January of 2004. And just realizing like some of these places, like knowing that prophecy will be fulfilled and this place is going to be, the desert will bloom again. And it's just amazing to know that is actually happening. That God's word is very true.
Yeah. And that's one of the special things too, in my mind, about what the nation of Israel has been showing us in the last 70 years, is that prior to that, we would sometimes read prophecy and we would look at it as being allegorical or spiritual or symbolic or abstract, or it's all
or artistic,
right? Exactly. Or like who knows what the prophets were talking about? Well, if Israel has shown us anything, exactly what you said, like the deserts are blooming, the streams are being found in the desert, the waste and forgotten cities are being rebuilt, and in Jerusalem, we're talking, just the things we're talking about. If the nation of Israel has shown us anything in the last 73, 74 years, is that God's word is actually remarkably accurate on a very tangible and concrete level. So it's not this mystical, faraway spiritual application, although clearly there's spiritual lessons and things to be learned. What we're learning is that God is actually remarkably faithful to His word. He's doing exactly what He said He will do after 2,600 years. And that in itself is just Jerusalem and Israel aside, God is demonstrating his faithfulness to the world in a way that he hasn't perhaps ever. And it's happening in our day in a way that we can see it and document it.
Yeah. I got to ask about the pictures that you took regarding the ramparts of the wall, the old city. The Isaiah 62 verse, I have posted Watchmen on your walls. I'm seeing you and, I'm seeing, is that your daughter that's there with you?
Yeah, that's our not so secret cameo. But yes, that's us.
Yes. So could you tell me like what was this like to do with her and to have her kind of experience some of these things with you?
Yeah, all of my kids I've got 4 kids and all but one have been with me at least twice to the land. And so she at that time was considering, you really love photography, really artistic, really creative. And so I said, why don't you come with me and, meet Eden and, learn what kind of the stuff he does and just, do some of your own shooting and just enjoy it. And so a good friend of mine who was also joining us that day, we were looking at that picture and she made the suggestion of like, hey, you guys, like in the old picture, there's this old guy and this, his wife or a girl, like you guys should be those people. And so it was sort of decided on the spot. Like we actually didn't plan on doing that ahead of time. But then there's a couple other places where her name's Rachel. There's a couple other places where Rachel and I are, you can kind of see the backs of us. But we have some, not so secret cameos in the book. But that was really special. It was just a lot of fun to have her there and wandering around and having her sort of in the workflow and the work process.
That's cool. How long does it take you to pull something like this together? I mean, there's a lot of pictures and you got to find a lot of angles and crevices. And I'm sure, some of those places where those pictures were originally taken have probably been remodeled maybe.
Yeah.
How long does it take to put all these things together?
I went through a lot. I know Jerusalem pretty well. Probably like some of your listeners may know their hometown. I mean, I've again prior to COVID, for the previous 5 or 6 years, I was spending 6, sometimes 7 months a year in Israel, whether I'm leading groups or connecting with tour guides or just doing these research projects. So I had a general idea where a lot of them were, and so I wanted to try to show as many different portions of the old city and the places that are around and some of the more familiar places. And of course, like the really iconic ones like the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, and those types of things that are just, undeniably, recognizable. So research wise, it was months and months and months. By the time we got to the photo shoot, I had it dialed in. I knew exactly what photos I was using. I had it all mapped out on on where we were going, and much to our much to the pain in our legs, we did the entire photo shoot in about 5 days, and we walked all over that. So we walked an average of about 9 miles a day. Our longest day was 13 miles, which is like a half marathon. Like we walked a half marathon in one day, wandering all over the city looking for like the perfect angles and getting the right guy to open the gate so we can get over there or climb that wall or talk to somebody. So, and a lot of it was that challenge was like, we need to come back at the right time when nobody's around so we can climb that wall and just be in and out in 5 minutes or talk to the right person or just kind of finagling stuff. And of course, again, Eden being Israeli and being happy to argue and, having the, having the life view as I do of like, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. So, we're not asking for permission. We'll just, we'll apologize if we have to, but we're just literally in and out just to get a couple photo angles. So anyhow, that was, sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't, but that was sort of our mentality. But we wrapped up the entire photo shoot in 5 days, and that was like, crash and burn after that. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm sure. I know something I just heard recently in the news, and I want to ask about this before we're going to wrap up here. But I know that there was some recent things with the city of David, like some archaeological discoveries that were basically underneath the visitors center. Do you know what I'm talking about? And were you able to kind of see any of those things firsthand? Yeah,
it's really pretty an amazing story. I mean, the city of David is one of those places that, for me, every time I go back to Israel, that's one of the places. The city of David, the place is right around the Temple Mount. It's all really close proximity. And it's one of the places I like going back to because it's an ongoing archaeological dig. And so they're always finding things. Yeah. They're always uncovering things. And so it was probably about 5, maybe 6 years ago now. I can't remember. They had just built this beautiful visitor center. they're looking at bringing tourism and bringing lots of people to see what's going on. And one of the head archaeologists comes to the head of the whole process and says, basically, like, I've got good news and I got bad news. The good news is we found a really massive, large stone structure. It very well could be remnants of David's palace, which would like shock and shake the archaeological world.
Yeah, really.
We feel pretty good about that we would love to do the excavation. The bad news is it's directly under the visitor center that you just built. And so what they did was brought other engineers in and literally lifted the visitor center, this massive building that they just built, put it on stilts, and started the archaeological dig underneath. And so then
that's pretty cool.
It's super cool. And then what they ended up doing then, of course, was like cutting holes in the floor and putting like windows on the floor, plexiglass. And so now you can like go down. You're at the visitor center, and then you can go down the steps into like portions of this, what officially they're calling the large stone structure. But the stuff that they found in this large stone structure, I mean, they're finding, and this is some of the fascinating things, and knowing that you like history, you dig this too, but like they're finding these like in ancient times, you'd have a column and then there would be a capstone. And on that capstone, depending on whatever the design of the capstone, you can kind of place it as far as like, who it belonged to.
Time frame and
so
who made it, yeah.
Exactly. And so they're finding these capstones from Tyre and like Sidon, like which is like northern day Lebanon, in a Jewish place. And they're like, what is that all about? And then you go back and you read in the scriptures and see that King David was friends with King Hiram up in Tyre and Sidon, and had workmen come down to build David's palace. So workmen from Tyre and Sidon are coming down and building, and they're building in their way. And so like all of these things that kind of tie in perfectly with the biblical narrative is just amazing.
Wow.
And that's just one. We could do a whole show just on the archaeological discoveries.
We might have to do that. Might have to do that because I love that stuff, man.
It's so fun. I mean, like in the last 50 years or so of just archaeological research, I think that the number is up to like 57 or 58 names that have been found in archaeology just around Jerusalem that are where names that are in the Bible have been found in archaeology at the exact place, the exact time frame, doing exactly what the Bible said that they were doing. I mean, it's turning a lot of the biblical narrative in a lot of even archaeologists' minds from like story time, fairy tales to like, wow, like this is actually legit historical accuracy. So it's validating the historical accuracy and the narrative of the scriptures in the most profound ways.
That's so cool. I love it. Yeah, we might need to do another follow-up conversation to talk about that stuff because I could geek out about that for quite a while, and that would be great.
Another one real quick that kind of ties in with Jerusalem Rising was that I had finished the book and sent the book. The manuscript was done, sent it to the publishers, and after we sent it to the publishers, there was an announcement coming out of Israel that some new portions of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and and they had released some of that, and there were two portions of Scripture that was never found before, and one was in Nahum, and the other was in Zechariah, and so I went. Zechariah, I've been, breathing Zechariah for the last little while, preparing for Jerusalem Rising. So I emailed a good friend that's a rabbi in Jerusalem, and I said, "Hey, do you have any inside information? Can you tell me what it was?" It was from Zechariah 8.
No way.
At the exact same time that like the manuscript was done, Jerusalem Rising is done. I'm talking all about Zechariah 8. By the time it's at the printers, they're finding new portions. Not new portions of Zechariah 8, but they're finding new portions of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was about Zechariah 8, about like caring for each other and doing justice to the poor and that kind of stuff that's in the scriptures. So to me, again, I just talking about like just God's hand and sort of prophetic timing and kind of putting his fingerprint on things. I felt like, man, this is just like, I just felt like this book was like the right place at the right time. And just out of nowhere, completely unexpected, they're making this announcement about Zechariah 8. It's like, oh, this is awesome.
That's the Lord at work for sure. So
yeah, for sure.
I know you said that you've got a third book already, almost ready to go. Can you give us a teaser of what that might be about?
Yeah, so the first book is Israel Rising, and it's about the restoration of the land. The second book that we're talking about now, Jerusalem Rising, is the restoration of the city of God. And the third one, Lord willing, will be another rising. We're still kind of discussing the titles, but it'll be another rising title that'll be about the restoration of the people. So I had done interviews with founders of the state of Israel that moved back to the land between 1946 and 1970. So, like, one of the most repeated promises in the scriptures is that God will return his people to the land, like we were just talking about. Yeah. And these are the people. These are some of the people that moved back. And so I interviewed over 30 people that came from 19 different nations, from 5 different continents, all with different stories. And so, you're talking about like enjoying these personal encounter stories in the books. The next book will be all about people's stories and how their process of coming back to the land, like what did they do in whatever nation, why did they move, what did they find in the land, and then asking them a series of 4 or 5 questions that were all really the same, that also end in what are you most proud of in your life, and what miracles have you seen in your life? And just asking open-ended questions like that, just to see what the answers will be. And I tell you, it was, for me personally, it was life-changing. I bet I cried through about half of those interviews. I mean, it was so powerful.
Wow.
And so I'm working on that now, and that'll be book 3 in the series.
So that's going to keep you busy for a little bit. But right now we've got the Jerusalem Rising book that we want to tell everybody how to get that. The City of Peace Reawakens, Ancient Prophecy, Modern Lens, Jerusalem Rising. Doug, how can people get a hold of that?
JerusalemRising.com is the best place for that. If you're ordering right now, we've got some exclusive bonuses that are connected with that, like some videos of me in Jerusalem doing some teaching and talking about the city and showing you some of the photos of the book. There's one photo comparison from 1860 to 2019. A then and now photo that we give you as well, that you can download and you can keep for your own. So there's some other cool little bonuses in there, but that's if you order at JerusalemRising.com. So that's the best place to do it.
Yep, very cool. Very cool. Well, Doug, it is a pleasure to have you as a friend, and I know we stay in touch periodically, even between interviews, and so I appreciate that. But thank you so much for sharing just the view that you have, and for allowing us to join you along your way.
It's been a twist and turn of a journey, and like we mentioned earlier on, it wasn't. Sometimes I say, like, I'm an accidental author. Like, I didn't really plan this journey, but it's just like the name of your show, kind of along the way. It was something that I thought I was going in this particular direction, and God kind of brought some diversions, and clearly it turned out far better than what I had planned or anticipated. But that's sort of how life goes, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining me and sharing this conversation with us.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Doug Hershey. To get your very own copy of Jerusalem Rising, go to JerusalemRising.com. I highly suggest his books. They are very inspirational. And until you get to Israel yourself, this is the next best thing. I'll be providing all his info in the show notes. Thank you for listening to Along the Way. If you've enjoyed joining me along my way, please share this with a friend who you think will be encouraged by this podcast. Also, please rate and review Along the Way on iTunes. That helps more people discover Along the Way. And subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and through my website, alongtheway.media. I hope that you've enjoyed this part of my journey, and may you realize when Jesus is walking with you along your way. Along the Way is honored to be part of the Charisma Podcast Network. You can find tons of spirit-filled content from their vast catalog of podcasts, including my Monday through Friday news stories for the Charisma News Podcast. Go to cpnshows.com to see the full list and latest episodes.